One thing that most people know about the Democratic Party is that it has a divide inside of it. It has what you might call a more moderate, pretty pro-business, like establishment side of it, and it has a progressive, much more left-wing side of it. And the party's been trying to find a balancing act between those two sides for a while now, at least since 2016. And the Democratic Party has been trying to solve that issue for a while, like that open division, and it's been like publicly discussed, and it's very easy to see. But one thing that it did make me think about when I was reflecting on it recently is, what is the Republican equivalent of that divide today? Because for a while that divide was Trump himself and how to respond to him, like accepting him as the leader of the party or not. But we've really come out of that. I mean, like, that kind of hit its peak in 2023 with Trump's primary challenges, but really that didn't really go anywhere, and the party pretty much united behind him. And that's where we are now, but that party is now in power, and it seems like accepted across the board that Trump is the figurehead and the person that is going to lead the party. But there are still cracks beneath the surface there. Interestingly enough, the person that I found who's like gone the most in-depth about what this internal division is in the Republican Party is not a Democrat or some political analyst, but actually a member of Trump's incoming administration. That individual is Vivek Ramaswamy. And no matter what you think of him, he has a very interesting analysis of where the Republican Party is heading and what issue it has in terms of factionalism going forward. For those who aren't too familiar, Vivek Ramaswamy ran for president in this year's Republican primaries, but dropped out pretty early on, although he did make a name for himself, and he's been a very staunch Trump defender ever since. His role in the Trump administration will be co-leading the Department of Government Efficiency with Elon Musk, basically looking for any way that they can to cut down the size of government and defund whatever systems they consider inefficient. But back to the reason that I'm talking about Vivek. He gave an interesting speech in, I believe, the final weeks of the campaign, where he was giving a very pessimistic, if not maybe just brutally honest assessment of what he saw as like an upcoming massive divide within what he calls the America First movement, but what I'll refer to as the MAGA movement throughout this video. Something that is going to split down the middle and is going to be a big source of tension in the Trump administration. Now, let me just clarify. I agree with Vivek Ramaswamy politically, basically on nothing. But I think what he has is a very interesting internal perspective and an honest ability to talk about a problem that he perceives his side of politics having going forward. How Vivek characterizes this divide is that on one hand, there are people like himself and Elon Musk, which he characterizes as the libertarian half of the MAGA movement. And then on the other side, you have people like JD Vance and RFK, who are more on the protectionist side of the MAGA movement, and that there is a immense ideological split between these two that is only going to become more apparent as the years go on. A simple way to put it is that there is one half of the movement with Vivek and Elon and business leaders that want to use this opportunity to cripple the federal government, to shrink it down immensely and basically try and get taxes down to nothing and make the federal government something that doesn't get in the way of businesses and what they perceive as personal freedom. But then on the other side, you have a section of this party that sees the scale of the federal government and says, oh, we want to use this to achieve our social, personal goals in the United States. A clear example of this contrast might be something like RFK Jr., who's now going to be, or is expected to be, the head of the Department of Health and Human Services. He wants a massive crusade against companies putting like specific chemicals and products into food and massively changing how the regulatory state looks after the food that Americans eat. A massive endeavor that is going to take a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of people, while at the same time you have this Department of Government Efficiency that's going to be recommending that the FDA get 75% of its staff fired. RFK cannot achieve his goals while also removing that many people from the workforce that he's going to need to do that. So there is a issue of tension there between those two sides. And that's just one example. I mean, look at JD Vance and his support for tariffs on Chinese production purely for the purpose of protecting American business, boosting American production, and trying to protect American workers as he sees it. That is a libertarian nightmare scenario, and something that will specifically hurt Elon Musk over there directing the Department of Government Efficiency. I mean, if those tariffs are put into place on China, Tesla's entire supply chain literally collapses. The reason I think this is worth paying attention to is that during Trump's first term, he had an enormous issue when it came to his own legitimacy with Republicans. He had to deal with a lot of establishment figures, as he calls them, people that might not have respected him or wanted to really put his plans into place, and there was immense turnover as he was firing people, hiring people, really just like fighting the chaos of trying to keep people together. But that is just not the case anymore. No one is questioning Trump. He is the king in this scenario, and keeping the metaphor going, what we really have is a royal court with factions vying for the king's approval. I think we will see cracks starting to form probably within like the first year of the administration. And this is something that Vivek himself has explicitly said is a concern of his when he was talking about the scale of the cuts he wants to make. His main concern relating to Trump was that with something that aggressive, with cuts that enormous and direct, you really need to be committed to it. And his main concern as a libertarian who wants to cut things is that Trump is going to have other priorities. Because if we're talking about cuts of that scale, they need to be the number one priority. And let's be honest, if Trump has something come up, if he wants some enormous project, some enormous effort that he wants to put heaps of energy and time into, but it comes at the cost of not being able to cut industries in the way that the libertarian side wants to, he's going to put himself first. The situation I see Elon and Vivek running into is that they will recommend a cut that, from a libertarian perspective, is essential and needs to happen. But Trump will make his own evaluation that it will somehow hurt him to do so, and he just won't do it. This Department of Government Efficiency is going to be a very vocal, very loud part of the Trump administration that will constantly be asking and demanding for more cuts to the federal government, more cuts to taxes, and at a certain point, that is going to get under Trump's skin. There's going to come a point where Trump deems any more cuts unacceptable. And he is dealing with fanatics in the libertarian side of his own movement who are talking about wanting 3/4 of government officials to be fired. That level of reduction. Trump is going to choose his own goals and his own long-term ideas over their fanatical desire to keep cutting things. How long does the MAGA movement stay united as one body if we get to a point where Republicans are asked to choose their loyalty between Trump's agenda for America or the most fundamental core of conservatism, tax cuts?